Here's to anyone who's ever looked up. The airheads. And the space cases.
Live long and prosper.
The flight fanatics. The armchair astronauts. And the casually curious. Here's to those who know the thrust in newtons of a Pratt & Whitney J75 turbojet engine. And those who silently ask, what's keeping this thing in the air? Here's to those who can list the name, mission history, and favorite breakfast of every Mercury astronaut. And those who've ever searched for, how does a toilet work in space? Here's to the people who knew a P-38 Lightning from a P-51 Mustang. And the people who thought those were the names of cars. Those captivated by the miracle of flight. And those who are just happy to make their flight. So whatever captures your curiosity.
We choose to go to the moon.
Or propels you to new heights. When it comes to the sky, there's space for all of us.
Good evening. I'm Roger Connor, an aeronautics curator here at the National Air and Space Museum. Welcome to tonight's Aviation Adventures lecture. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see everyone gathered here in the Airbus IMAX Theater at the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. And we're pleased to make this event accessible to people all across the country through the live stream. We appreciate you spending your evening with us. The Aviation Adventures Lecture Series spotlights all aspects of aviation, from military flight to record-setting feats in the air to the humanitarian uses of aviation. This lecture series is the museum's longest-running sponsored program. This is our 43rd year doing these lectures, still sponsored by our friends at GE Aerospace. I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to GE Aerospace for their ongoing support of this series, which makes it possible for us to provide access to these programs free of charge, both in person and online. This fall, our Aviation Adventure lectures are focused on telling the stories and remembering the contributions of trailblazing women in military aviation. Tonight, it will be my honor and privilege to introduce Commander LaShonda Hawkins and Commander Chanel Lee, U.S. Coast Guard. Before we get to the talk, I should note that our third speaker, Commander Janine Menzie, like thousands of other Floridians, had her flight out of Tampa canceled and was not able to be here this evening. It is an unfortunate coincidence that we are having this lecture in the immediate aftermath of another devastating hurricane. As we listen to Commanders Hawkins and Lee this evening, the emergency response underway once again highlights the essential life-saving support of Coast Guard aviation. All too often, we only become aware of the importance of Coast Guard aviators in time of disaster. Of course, the rescues don't stop after the emergency ends. Every day, there are any number of scenarios that require an urgent Coast Guard response. While search and rescue is a big part of that responsibility, and certainly the most visible component of Coast Guard aviation, it is only one piece of a remarkably broad obligation that our nation has entrusted to the Coast Guard. Law enforcement and homeland security missions require entirely different skill sets for aviators than the incredibly demanding all-weather expertise they routinely demonstrate as first responders. Likewise, the intercept and protection of migrants attempting dangerous open water crossings contrasts with divergent responsibilities in extreme environments like polar operations and environmental protection, all of which add yet another layer of complexity to their expansive mission set. And in wartime, the Coast Guard has additional roles to support the Department of Defense and ensure national security. Some of the history behind this remarkable array of national service is represented here at the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. The HH-52 helicopter displayed in the aviation hangar represents the culmination of a long-standing vision of some truly remarkable innovators. The Coast Guard were not only early adopters of the helicopter, but were essential pioneers in bringing the practical helicopter into being. A few hundred feet away, just behind the Enola Gay, sits the XR-4, the prototype for the first helicopter to be put into volume production. That airframe was also the first helicopter flown by a Coast Guard aviator, Commander Frank Erickson. After witnessing the devastation of Pearl Harbor and seeing drowning sailors who could not be saved, he moved with a single-minded determination to make the helicopter a life-saving vehicle. Though often faced with intense skepticism, he prevailed, and the Coast Guard helped establish the helicopter as a viable military aircraft and fostered its continued development as the go-to platform for the most difficult and treacherous rescue scenarios. The museum here also has a display of Coast Guard memorabilia that highlights an outstanding tradition of extraordinary aeronautical skill. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola displays the NC-4 on loan from the National Air and Space Museum. That first airplane to cross the Atlantic in 1919 had as its co-pilot Elmer Stone, the Coast Guard's first aviator. Stone's achievement in establishing aircraft and air-sea rescue have highlighted a 107-year tradition of humanitarian innovation at its finest. Commanders LaShonda Hawkins and Chanel Lee have continued to innovate and path break in the mode of Elmer Stone and Frank Erickson. Not only are they both exceptional aviators, but they are outstanding leaders in their areas of operation. In 2010, Commander LaShonda Hawkins became the first African-American female helicopter pilot in the Coast Guard. In her 18 years with the Coast Guard, she has served as the Law Enforcement and Intelligence Division head, as an aircraft commander who has amassed over 2,000 flight hours, conducting search and rescue, counter-drug, law enforcement, and presidential air intercept missions. In 2015, she was appointed a White House Fellow by President Barack Obama, and later went on to serve as the Special Assistant to the NASA Administrator General Charles F. Bolden and Deputy Liaison to the U.S. Senate. Commander Chanel Lee is a pilot and aerospace engineer. She was the first African-American woman to fly an MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter. She has flown counter-drug missions in the Caribbean and overseen rescue efforts at sea, as well as during mudslides and wildfires. Since then, she has served as the engineering officer for the C-27 aircraft program and in a role with the Technical Airworthiness Authority. Please join me and welcome these outstanding officers and aviators. Most people are familiar with the Coast Guard's life-saving roles in natural disasters and maritime search and rescue. We've certainly seen with Milton passing through Florida that it's obviously got to be a very challenging environment. Can you say just a little bit about what goes on in these types of scenarios, or if that's something you've participated in, or if you have any insight into what it's like to operate in those environments? I think a lot of people are very curious about what it's like to fly in those sorts of scenarios.
Yeah, certainly. So first I'd like to say thank you to the Smithsonian for having us. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Erica, and your whole team for putting this together. We are so honored to be here, so thank you. Also, I think I could speak for the both of us that our hearts and prayers go out to all the families and communities that have been impacted by Helene and by Milton. Obviously, like you said, Janine's not here. She had 5 feet of flooding from Helene and then had to evacuate. So it's been a challenging time for them. So please keep them in your thoughts and prayers. As far as hurricane response and those type of missions for the Coast Guard, that's really where we shine, and that's really kind of the bread and butter. I'm biased, but the bread and butter of the work that we do as pilots. And so Chanel and Chanel can tell her story, but we've had opportunities to launch and to serve our local communities and post hurricane assessments. And so what does that look like, right? You don't know what it looks like, honestly, until you get on scene. You have little pieces of the puzzle early on, but you don't know how many people are in the water. You don't know how many people you're going to medevac. You don't know what your gas is necessarily going to look like or how many orbits you're going to have to do once you get on scene. There are so many variables that are left up in the air until you actually get on scene and you can assess and put eyes on yourself. But what's the beautiful part about that, I think, is it really speaks to the training programs and platforms that the Coast Guard has in place for their aviators, and also the crew resource management that we have between the two pilots, the rescue swimmer, and the flight mechanic. And it's very close-knit. I'm sure with you as well, there's not a lot of ma'ams, sirs, on the flight deck or in the cockpit, because if we go down, we're going down a half a second behind one another, right? So I need your input as much as you need my input, and we get together, we put a good brief together to where we feel safest getting airborne and getting on scene, and then we assess what it looks like when we get there, and we try to make the best decisions and lean on our training so that we can bring people back home safely to their families.
Commander Lee, do you? Now you've flown both fixed wing and rotary wing. Is that correct?
That is correct, Roger. Although I would not call myself an expert fixed wing pilot. I flew 60s for most of my career. So flew H-60 helicopters for about 8 years or so. And I agree with Shonda. So we train like we fight. So that is our motto. That is what we do. We train. We do training flights on a routine basis. So when the hurricane comes, when the bad weather comes, when the SAR alarm goes off, we're ready to execute. And the other thing I'll say, I mean, you spoke to it about our air crews, and I mean that is the bread and butter of the Coast Guard. It's the people, right? So when we strap up and we get in that helicopter together, all the other ancillary things tend to fall away because we all have a mission, we all have a family, and we all know that in order for us to return safely and execute the mission, we have to work together to do that. And so I think the Coast Guard is, I mean, we're the best I've seen at that. And that's how we're able to go out when the storms come, when things go awry, and execute our missions.
In terms of all the wide array of missions that you have, is there any that you find the most interesting or challenging, that you would prefer to do, or that really you find kind of test your skills?
Well, it's cool to be a hero, right? I mean, that's always great.
I heard you saved a dog once.
I did save a dog once, many, many years ago, and apparently it's still on the internet. Of all the things I've done, all the, challenges, accomplishments, this video seems to follow me around the most. So I think, if I recall correctly, I was a brand new aircraft commander stationed down in Clearwater, Florida, and just a regular duty day. As you can see, the weather's great. So it's not, again, it's not outside of our routine training, what we do. There was a gentleman on his sailboat, and I think the sailboat caught fire, and he had a dog on his sailboat. And so when we went to rescue the gentleman, we put his dog in the basket as well. And it's funny because, again, I have been in dark and stormy nights and done all kinds of things, but when we taxied back into Air Station Clearwater, there was media everywhere, cameras flashing. So it's a dog. And so again, yes, we will do our very best to rescue you, your families, and your pets. That is the dog. That's cool.
So about those dark and stormy nights, I mean, what's the kind of ultimate there I was that you've had to deal with in terms of those challenging operations? What would you like the news media to show up for?
I'll let Chanel tackle that one because my There Was story wasn't on a dark and stormy night. It wasn't even in the aircraft. So I'll let you lead, and then I'll take up the rear.
Yeah, so I've done a bunch of SAR cases over my time, but I do think I have a favorite. It wasn't my hardest SAR case. But it is absolutely one of my favorites, and I'll tell you why. So I was stationed in Clearwater again, and I was getting ready to deploy down to the Bahamas. But I think the storm was Joaquin, and maybe a lot of Americans aren't familiar with that storm, but it devastated the Caribbean, and in particular the Bahamas, which is where we deploy to. And so I was scheduled to deploy, regularly scheduled deployment. It happens all the time. You know, we go down for a week or so and we come back. And I think we were delayed, but I was excited about this deployment because I was deploying with one of my friends. So up until this point, I had mostly deployed with people that were my instructors, older than me, my mentors. But this deployment was going to be cool because it was one of my classmates from the Coast Guard Academy. We went to flight school together, so it was just an exciting thing. But then the storm came through. So anyways, I think we were delayed, but we made it down to Andros Island down in the Bahamas. And of course, we are on standby to respond. And the middle of the night, the alarm goes off. There is a gentleman that needs to be medevaced from Long Island down in the Bahamas. And so, it's dark, we put our NVGs on, we get the crew. We knew that these things were gonna happen because the storm had just sort of devastated the Bahamas. And so we take off, we're talking with the command center. They told us that the ambulance would meet us at the airport in Long Island. And so we're familiar with all of the airports on all the different islands, so we know exactly where to go, right? So we're taking off, we're doing max speed, and we're heading out to Long Island. And I'll never forget, we get to Long Island, and the airport is completely underwater. And so obviously there's no ambulance there. So we reached back to the command center. We're like, we can't find the gentleman. We don't see the ambulance. There is nowhere to land this helicopter. So we do a low pass over the airport, and we can tell very clearly that the airport is submerged underwater. And we were getting ready to RTB, right? So we're flying around low-level circles, just looking for sort of any inkling. And the command center was saying, well, if you can't find the ambulance, then you have to RTB. And just as they were saying that, we look over in the distance, like to the right. And I didn't know this until later, but the high point on Long Island is the school, the single school. And every person that lived on Long Island had driven their cars to the high point at the school and made essentially a helicopter landing pad with their cars, with their headlamps, so that we could have a space to land and rescue this gentleman and take him, medevac him out of there to Nassau. And I just thought that was incredible. Because, this is, again, it's about people. And this is nonverbal communication. No one told them to do that. We didn't know they were gonna do that, but they did that. As a community, they were determined to make sure that gentleman was able to be medevaced out of that space and safely delivered to Nassau. And so that's what we did. And so that's why I say it's not the hardest SAR case that I've ever had, because, it was like daytime, right? It's every car on Long Island with their headlamps in a football field at the school. So it was a fairly benign approach in landing. We landed, the ambulance was there. They transported him over into the helicopter, and we took off and delivered, took the gentleman to Nassau, and he lived.
I don't think I've ever heard you tell that story. That is fantastic, and I'm so glad I'm shifting gears to something that has nothing to do with flying. So my veraa story, I want to tell this story just to highlight that there are a lot of different ways to serve while being active duty and even being an aviator in the Coast Guard. And so as you mentioned in the introductions, I was a White House Fellow. And during my fellowship year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the White House Fellows. And so we're at a function at the White House, and we're having light hors d'oeuvres, and I may have had some champagne. I may have had 2 glasses of champagne, and a young lady comes over to me and she says, "Are you LaShonda?" And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. I should have just had the 1 glass. And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Okay, well, follow me. There's somebody over at the double doors that wants to speak with you." And of course, my heart's pumping out of my chest, and I'm like, oh man, I've really done it. I get over to the double doors, there's nobody there. I'm looking around, someone opens the doors, there's a lady on the other end. "Are you LaShonda?" "Yes." "Follow me." "Okay." So I go around, and so the president, who was President Barack Obama during that year, was going to be speaking to the full cohort, not just my class, but all of the living White House Fellows, which there are typically around 800 or just under living at one time. And so we were all there at this anniversary. So the room that the president's going to be speaking in, he takes me to the front of the room in this roped off area. So now I'm saying, ooh, maybe I'm not in trouble. Maybe this is really good, right? So I'm there, I'm in the front. The president comes out, he provides opening remarks about the White House Fellowship and what it means to be a public servant and why it's so important that we were there. And then he says, "But before I continue, I've got to tell you this story about a young woman whose mother, she lost her mother early on and went through the foster care system and became a pilot in the Coast Guard." And he tells like my whole life story in front of this crowd of people. You can see the cameras, and I'm like shaking in my boots, like I cannot believe this is happening. But like this will forever be a highlight of my life, of my career. At the end, he comes over, he shakes my hand, he tells me how proud he is of me, and it will always just be so special to me that time in my life. So that's my there I was, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a video.
There is a video.
There is a video.
There's a video
I've seen the video. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Since you brought up life story, how did you get into the Coast Guard and specifically aviation for both of you?
My dream school was Spelman College. Is that Erica? Oh, my dream school was Spelman College. I wanted to go to Spelman. It's an all-women's school in Atlanta. I wanted to go there for the sisterhood and to serve, which I was able to do through the Bonner Scholarship Foundation. And I learned about service on a deeper level that really made me feel like I could change the world. And it could sound cliche, but I think sometimes when we think about changing the world, we think of this monumental kind of Herculean thing that we've got to do to change the world on a national or global scale. And the truth is you change the world one person at a time. And as my good friend Jeff, who may or may not be here today, as my good friend Jeff would say, you do for one what you wish you could do for many. And I really think that is at the essence of service, and Spelman College really gets that. So I wanted to serve, continue to do that, but in a greater capacity, and I didn't know what that would look like until I met my recruiter, Senior Chief Dexter Lindsay, who completely convinced me to join the Coast Guard. I didn't know that the Coast Guard was a part of the military. I didn't know what they did. I had no interaction. And so he taught me a lot about the Coast Guard's mission, that they were life-saving service. I fell in love immediately. I probably met Senior Chief Lindsay maybe early January to spring to March of 2005, and I was in boot camp that June. And so just really inspired by the missions, I felt like everything the Coast Guard had to offer really aligned with my personal values and allowed me to serve my country. And so, that's how it happened. That's how I joined.
How did I join the Coast Guard?
And also, what drew you into aviation specifically?
Yeah, so I joined the Coast Guard. I went to boot camp in June of 2003. And so right before that, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in my life. And so my dad served in the Air Force, and I decided I had been out of high school for over a year. And so my parents were like, Chanel, you got to do something, you know. And so I looked into military service, and some people know this story, but I was actually going to join the Marine Corps. And I took the ASVAB with the Marine Corps, and in Richmond, which is where I'm from, all of the recruiting offices are together. At the time, they were co-located downtown in Richmond. And so I'm sitting in the lobby, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to join the Marines. No dig on the Marine Corps, let me just be clear. But I was just sort of ruminating as an 18-year-old, like, what do I want to do? Also, again, this is in 2003, so I didn't necessarily want to go to Iraq or Afghanistan at the time. And then there was a young lady that was sitting in the recruiting office, and she said, what are you about to do? I said, I don't know. What are you about to do? And she said, well, I'm joining the Coast Guard. And I said, well, what is the Coast Guard? And she said, I don't know, but all you do is scuba dive and be a lifeguard. And I said, I'm doing that. I went home, I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm going to the Coast Guard. And, you know, I did a little bit of research, probably. I mean, you know, I did not know all that that came along with service in the Coast Guard, honestly. But I did. I joined the Coast Guard. I went to boot camp. It was a life-changing experience. And then I was stationed at the small boat station in Philly. Also, I ran around boot camp for 7.5 weeks, just knowing in the back of my head that any day now I was going to learn how to scuba dive. Yeah, she didn't tell the truth. I still don't know how to scuba dive. And then, so many months later, I'm doing helicopter operations at the small boat station in Philly. And so I was a non-rate, so, you know, E3, my job was to clean the boats and handle lines, essentially. And they were like, you know, Seaman Lee, do you want to go do helicopter ops? I said, sure. Like, you know, what is that? I don't know. It's the coolest thing. So that is my first exposure to Coast Guard aviation, was going out on the boat and them lowering down a basket to me and someone yelling at me to tell me, you know, ground it, use the grounding wand. And so I asked the bosun, I said, the bosun's mate, I said, how do I get up there? And they said, you have to be an officer. And so I kind of tucked that away. Like, I didn't know how to be an officer. I didn't know what that took. I didn't know anything about really the, you know, necessarily like officer candidate school or the Coast Guard Academy or what that even looked like for me. And then many years later, through, you know, a series of other events, I was a cadet at the Coast Guard Academy, and I found myself in a position to compete, to go to flight school. So I thought I'd try it.
I do. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how I was introduced to aviation, so I wanted to wrap that story up. So when I joined the Coast Guard, I came in through a program called CSPI, the College Student Pre-Commissioning Initiative, which is similar to ROTC, but way better, and you get paid more. So that program, your primary job is to finish your college education, keep your grades up. During your summers, you go visit a Coast Guard station just to learn more about the missions and what we do, and then you go back to school, you graduate. So I did that program. I graduated from Spelman in May of 2007. They didn't have another available officer candidate school till January of 2008. So I had all that time to get more exposure to the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard's mission. So one of the things that I volunteered to do was to get underway, which was so fun. I got underway on one of our ships, our Coast Guard cutters, the Coast Guard cutter Midget out of Seattle. We sailed for 3 months. We went to Dutch Harbor and Kodiak and Japan, and it was the coolest thing I had ever done. It's like being on a cruise ship, but with more work, I guess. But I had a lot of fun, and I made some friendships that I still have to this day. And I thought that's what I wanted to do, to be a ship driver. I mean, you've never seen more beautiful stars. You've never seen more beautiful stars than being out in the middle of the ocean and seeing all the falling stars and shooting stars. But anyway, we were coming back into Seattle. The operations officer said, hey, you know what you want to do? I said, yeah, I want to be a ship driver. He said, well, the Coast Guard only has one black female pilot. Her name is Janine Menzie. Have you ever thought about flying? I said, no. Don't you have to be smart to do that? Don't you have to go to the academy or be an engineer to do that? And he said, oh, I've seen you working hard. You should, look into it. So for me, it was a surprise to hear about Janine, especially coming from Spelman, where I'm around all rock star black women. And so to hear that she was the only one, I reached out. So I totally stalked her. Will you be my friend? Talk to me, please. She said, yeah, if you can get, she was in Clearwater. That's exactly how she looked when I met her. And so she said, if you can get orders to Clearwater, I'll teach you everything that I know or that I can before you go to officer candidate school. So I go down to Clearwater, I meet her. So I had never met a pilot in my life. So the first pilot that I met was a Jamaican black woman flying the Hercules, for the Coast Guard. And it just blew my mind. She took me on my first flight with her. Her husband, George, he was flying 60s. I think I flew with George. I flew with 65 while I was there at Clearwater. And so I knew just from seeing her, I'm like, nobody gave me the memo. I didn't know black girls were flying. Like, why didn't someone tell me sooner? But just from seeing her, I knew that I could do it. I knew I could at least try. I didn't know if it was going to work, but I can at least try. And so I flew with her. But when I flew the helicopters, there was just something different about it, right?
Hovering is dope.
Hovering is dope. And it's probably, Jeff can attest to this as well. It is the most, being in a hover, being able to maintain a stable hover over just pavement, let alone over the back of a boat or landing on the back of a boat. It's just the coolest thing you'll ever do. And so when I was in Clearwater before I became an officer, they put me in a 60 in the back. I had my legs dangling off the side, and I could feel the ocean spray in my face. I'm like, I'm sold, man. Say less. And so I went to flight school and competed, and then not flight school. I went to officer candidate school, then to flight school, and selected to fly the 65, which is what you see there.
So now that you've got a few years under your belt, what would you say to a young person that is looking at the Coast Guard? What would be your advice in terms of kind of reaching that goal? What words of wisdom can you share?
If Chanel and I can do it, I think anybody can do it. You just got to chase your dreams. You can't be intimidated by it. You can't. You just got to go after it. You never know what's possible unless you keep taking those steps forward in the right direction to kind of achieve your dreams. Like I said, I had never looked in the sky at a plane or a helicopter and thought that was something that I could do until I saw someone that looked like me doing it. And so I think it's on us. So there's a book that I'm reading, and it's called Intrusive Leadership, How to Be That Leader. And something that the author says in there is that empowerment isn't a gift, it's a responsibility. And so I think our main thing is to be present, to be seen, to be in our communities, to let young people know that you can do it. Like I said, I had some experience in the foster care system. You can do it, right? I think that sometimes people get in their own way of their dreams, but I think that if you want it bad enough, you find ways to kick down the door. You find ways to align yourself with opportunities. You find your way to surround yourself with people who want to see you succeed and who will help you succeed and who will advocate on your behalf. And so I think that's what I would tell a young person. We need you. The Coast Guard, I think, already has some of the absolute best talent there is, hands down. I am biased, but that's a fact. But we need more. We need more. It's competitive out there in the private sector. A lot of young people don't see the military as attractive as I think, some years ago, but we need you. I think you would love serving in the Coast Guard. If you want to fly, we would love to fly with you and have you on our flight deck.
Commander Lee, how do you?
Yeah, everything Shonda said. When I was a kid, my mom used to say the sky's the limit. And so we did the sky. So what I tell kids now is there is no limit. You can do whatever you want, whatever it is that you want to do. And we're doing this forum. I'm happy to provide my information. Call me anytime and I will help you achieve the goal. I probably, maybe I have or haven't done what you would like to do, but I know someone that can point us in the right direction and we will get there. So just go out and chase every single one of your dreams and pursue it relentlessly.
Speaking of pursuing things relentlessly, I also wanted to kind of give another shout out to Chanel and request a round of applause because Chanel is the recipient of the highest aerospace engineering award the Coast Guard has to offer, and she just won it. It was going to be presented to her, in a couple weeks, 2 weeks in Jacksonville at the Roost, but it's going to be rescheduled. But anyway, can we get a round of applause for Chanel?
Thank you.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you.
So, yeah, how is it kind of juggling those two kind of amazing career tracks, engineering and being an aviator, right? That's a lot to do. How do you do it, and what was that experience like, kind of going from one to the other?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, my background, I was a civil engineering undergrad student at the Coast Guard Academy, and the reason why I chose to be an engineer when I was a cadet was because I had a professor who said that engineers see the world differently. And I didn't know what she meant, but I wanted to find out. I wanted to figure it out. And so I identify as an engineer, and I have for a very long time, right? I am into understanding how things move, work, stand still, support us, and fly. And so, that's just about like me as a person, Chanel Lee. And then obviously having the opportunity to go fly with the Coast Guard is one of the great honors of my life. It's one of my favorite things to do. Shonda is right, hovering is the coolest. And I mean, all planes are cool. Let me just be clear. And so I think the Coast Guard is really unique in that way. Someone asked me earlier this evening, what do I want to do when I get out of the Coast Guard? Like, do you want to be an engineer or do you want to fly? Like, do you want to be a pilot? And really, my favorite thing about having had this opportunity within the Coast Guard is that the Coast Guard is unique across the world in that the aeronautical and aerospace engineers are all also pilots. And so I think that having the person that is making the decision about putting, prototyping a new component for an aircraft, also having experience being the end user, I think that actually makes the Coast Guard really agile. I think that it gives you a broader perspective. So, I mean, I took a helicopter aerodynamics course after I'd been flying for, many, many years in the Coast Guard during graduate school. And, my professor had never been in a helicopter. So he's standing in front of the board and of course he knows what he's talking about, aerodynamically speaking. But he's describing a phenomenon called retreating blade stall. And the hairs on the back of my neck stand up because I did retreating blade stall before, by accident. So just, So just, having had that experience and then, seeing the aerodynamic principles behind it and putting that all together and having that walking and talking in one body and one human as you go forth and make decisions, I think is highly unique about the Coast Guard, and it's one of my favorite things.
So besides the hovering, what is the highlight of your career?
I would say, so the fellowship was a highlight, but I think just saving lives. When you are out there, it's a big wide ocean out there. It's hard to find people. It's very hard. Everyone is not in the water with reflective, gear. Everybody doesn't have flares or a strobe. And it's tough, but when you go out there, you've got your goggles on, it's the dark and stormy, and you see that little flicker of a light, right? And somebody in your crew points it out, and you're aiming towards it, and you're like, oh, I think we got him this time. You mark that position over them, and I'm going to get you, right? I'm bringing you home with me today, and then you can bring them, hoist them into your helicopter. The 65 is much smaller than the 60. Which means that I can turn around in my helicopter and I could put my hand on your shoulder and say, buddy, you're going home tonight, right? You're going to make it home to your kids. And there's just nothing like that. There's nothing like that in the world. And I think that we're really fortunate for the opportunity to be able to save people's lives. We have crews that are working their tails off right now in Florida trying to do that exact thing. And that's the highlight for me. It's the saving lives for me.
Hero. Yeah, so Shonda mentioned that I won the Aeronautical Engineer of the Year award this last year, and that is one of the great honors, I would say, of my professional career. And Admiral Grable's here, and she called me just on a morning directly, and she's like, hey, it's Admiral Grable. It's like and I cried. The year that preceded me receiving that award was the hardest year of my professional career. That is one of the highlights of my career for sure. But I think my highlight is what my friends, my Coast Guard family and friends that I have grown with, learned with, faltered with, cried with, and everything else. The people that have helped me, like that, what occurred in 2023, it did not happen in a vacuum. It happened because of the great Coast Guard family and support that I've been able to build over the course of my career. And for me, when this is all said and done, that's what I'm gonna remember the most. I think when we were doing the rehearsal, someone said, oh, you and Shonda clearly, have a relationship. It's like, yeah, we've been friends for a very long time. We've been through the thick, the thin, the good, the bad, and everything else in between. And that's just, for me, that's the highlight.
If you could do anything else in the Coast Guard that you haven't gotten to do yet, what would that be?
We do the best job that there is in the Coast Guard. I don't know, maybe try my luck at being a rescue swimmer. I'd probably die, but I think they're the true heroes. Their job is so hard, right? Yes, we're up front, we're keeping the helicopter stable, but this job, sharks? No thanks. But would it be a next level of a challenge for me? Absolutely. So I think if I wasn't flying, maybe I'd try my hand at that.
I'd be a boat driver.
All right. And so stations, that's the other thing, right? You get to be in some kind of amazing different sites. What's the best one, or where would you like to go if that you haven't gotten to go?
Miami, probably. No, Tampa. Well, I haven't been stationed in Tampa. I'd say, Miami, I had a lot of fun in Miami. I learned a lot in Miami. I almost wish that, I almost wish that Air Station Miami was not my third tour. I wish it was my first tour. Because of the operational tempo, it's so incredibly busy, Miami and Clearwater. But you get to see all of the mission sets, right? You're stopping drugs, you're interdicting migrants, you're saving lives, you're protecting fish, you're landing on the back of the ships, you're doing all the deployments. And so I learned and I grew a lot there. I became a better pilot there. I got the best tans there. And so, yeah.
Yeah, Roger, this is live. You can't ask me what's my favorite in front of everyone. Everything's my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was stationed in Clearwater for 5 years as a nugget flying H-60s. That's my favorite. That's the most fun I've had. That's where I grew the most. That's where I started to perfect my craft. That's where I got picked up to be an aeronautical engineer, and a lot of the mentors that I still have to this day I met during my time there.
Great. Well, we'd like to go ahead and open it up to audience questions, or if anybody has an online question.
So for Chanel and I, we did our flight training in Pensacola, and my good friend Kristen Jekyll, who was my partner in flight school and in my transition course, yes, in Pensacola, Florida. So we do our introductory flight screening there. I don't know how much has changed over the years, but we start with introductory flight screening, IFS. We're flying Cessna 172s just to make sure we can, get acclimated to flying. We're not too scared. We don't get too airsick. We do our solos, and then we progress to what ground school? Is it ground school next? API? We go to advanced primary, don't get me to line. We go to ground school, we do ground school for several weeks, then we move on to flying. I flew the T-34, Chanel flew the T-6. We learn how to do formation flying and aerobatics and IFR flying and a lot of basic instrument work. And then if you select to fly fixed wing, there's a different track. I'm not really sure, I don't want to mess it up where their training is, but if you fly helicopters, you stay there in Pensacola and you finish out your training there. And then once you graduate, you go to Aviation Training Center Mobile, where we learn how to fly the 65 and the 60.
We have an outside question on, you've accomplished so much, what would you want to accomplish next?
Yeah, when people ask me this, I say that space would be cool.
All right.
I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. Right now, I'm doing my next absolute best and favorite thing, and that's being a mom. I have my first child. She's 4 months, Nola Renee. She's the most beautiful thing. And she has the most gorgeous father. I think he's out there somewhere. He's in the green suit tonight, guys, and he looks like he came right off of GQ. So yeah, that is my that's my best job that I'm doing right now. So what's next? I'm not sure. Maybe Nola will direct me.
While you change your iPad, I do want to give a shout out and just demonstrate how small the Coast Guard is. So Kristen Jekyll is here in the audience, and like Shonda mentioned, they went through flight school together. But that story that I told about me doing helo ops when I was a non-raid in Philadelphia, so Kristen Jekyll. She was actually a non-rate at the same small boat station that I was just a couple months prior, and she had gotten picked up for the airman program and was an airman at Air Station Atlantic City. And so guess who lowered the basket down to me for the very first time when I was learning what Coast Guard aviation was all about? It's Kristen Jekyll.
Amara, who's a junior in high school, says that she's interested in this career path, and she's wondering if you had any advice for what she should study in college.
I think you study what you want, what you're passionate about. I did 2 years as a biochem major. I thought I wanted to be an anesthesiologist, and then I switched my major to psychology, and because I thought I wanted to do other things, and I'm not doing anything with either one of those. But that's where my passions were at the time. I think if you keep your grades up and you perform, you will excel no matter what you do. So I don't think that you have to, be an engineer or necessarily in a STEM degree to succeed as a pilot. I think I'm living proof of that. I think you go where your heart is and you do your very best job there.
We have another question. What challenges did you face in paving the way for black aviators, and what advice would you give to those aspiring to follow in your footsteps?
Well, so I think the general challenge is aviation in the military, outside of the military, is male dominated. And so I think that when you come into a profession like ours, when you see somebody that looks like you, it makes a world of difference. Because you share common experiences, common backgrounds. I can call Chanel with all of my questions that maybe I think are dumb questions that I'm too scared or too embarrassed to ask somebody else. I can call Chanel, I can call Janine, I can call, my sisterhood, and really lean on them. And so I think that, at least for me early on in my career, one of the challenges that I had was more of an internal challenge, right? So when I got to Air Station Los Angeles, there was another man of color who's now Admiral Michael Platt, but he was departing as I was coming in. And so once he left, the only other person of color at the unit was the janitor. And so I think mentally, I automatically said, well, I'm the only one, nobody gets me, I'm so different, right? When that's just not true all the time. Can it be true in some circumstances? Yes, but that's not true. And so I think that the challenge that I found in myself is, one, you can't put up your own barrier first, right? And that you've got to let people in, and those relationships kind of go both ways. And I think the journey is a lot easier. You can't get wrapped around the axis about being the only one. If you're the only one, you're the only one, and you got to kick butt and take names, and you have to let your professionalism and your training and your performance speak for itself, right? If I outperform you, I outperform you. It doesn't matter what color we are. The data speaks for itself. My flying speaks for itself. So I think that you've got to always have that at the forefront. Is that I'm here to save lives, I'm here to do my job, I'm here to perform, and you can't get too wrapped up in I'm the only black person here, I'm the only girl here, so what? Girls do a lot of things better than boys do, and I think we've just got to kind of like live in that and own that. So I hope that answers that. What did I miss there?
Yeah, I think that I appreciate the question. So I will say, so I've only been myself my whole life, right? So I don't know what it's like to be anything other than myself. But the point is, in my opinion, is to get to a place of understanding. And so I think, like what Shonda mentioned is a true thing. And that's part of the story. There's a whole lot to this, like to life, and to moving through life. But you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I would say one of my biggest challenges was not reaching out to find out what it is I need to be doing in a particular moment. And I think that if you have a difference, you know, that can be more of a challenge. But you have to do it, right? And I think that, you know, sometimes you're not going to be in certain rooms and in certain conversations. And I don't think that that's necessarily intentional. There's a lot of, implicit bias that goes into everything that we do, all of us. And so in order to overcome that, you need to recognize that, you need to ask questions, you have to reach out. You know, you definitely need multiple mentors to help you sort of navigate that, because, you know, once I started to figure out what it was that I needed to do or what I was not recognizing, you know, things got a lot better for me.
And I want to foot stomp what Chanel said, because I've always admired this about you, and I think I've told you this before, but when you say, like, I've always just been myself and you've just been your authentic self, and I think that is one of the most beautiful things about her, and I think that I've always looked up to her a lot in that regard, because I think that when I came in, I just felt like I have to be this certain kind of way to fit in, or I have to look this part, or I have to sound this way, and I can't really make these mistakes, and I can't ask the stupid questions. And it's like, look, we all have questions, right? None of us are perfect. And I wish I could have been more like Chanel earlier on in my career, but I think that's just a beautiful gift that you have.
I think we have time for one more question here, and that would be, what advice do you have to young women in particular that are just broad, not just the Coast Guard, but considering a career in aviation or aerospace more broadly?
It may sound too simple, but I think you just do it, right? I think that one thing that Chanel mentioned is like seeking out mentors. You've got to build a team and a circle of people around you who can help you get there or do the things that you want to do, right? So seek out pilots, seek out people in aerospace professions, see what they're doing to have reached the level of success that they have, in ways that they can help get you there. Ask all the questions, reach out. I think when you're earlier on or younger, you know, just kind of starting, it can be intimidating to reach out because you feel like people are so busy or you're nagging or things like that. You're not. Reach out. You can reach out to us. You can reach out to, you know, to your mentors and things around you. And we will, our specific path may not work for you, but like Chanel said earlier, we can find somebody that can help you get there. So I think you make your plan and you work that plan and you keep at it, you know, every day until you've reached the goal.
Yeah, and if you ever have that little voice, you know, in the back of your mind that's telling you that you can't do it, I'm here to say you can. You absolutely can. And just that little bit of hesitation, do not let it stop you. If you have something that you would like to do, just do it.
Hey, got to end on that note, right? Thank you. Thank you both so much. And thank you to all of you and to our ASL interpreter, Travis Hagler, and of course, thank you to Commander Lee and Commander Hawkins. Thank you so much. We hope you'll join us for our 2025 lecture season. Thanks to GE Aerospace for the generous support of the Aviation Adventure Lecture Series, and you can find more programs on the events page of our website. Thank you so much. Good night.